And I want to thank you for coming this morning. My name is Susan Graham. I'm obviously the one standing up here in front of you. And we have webinar people participating as well. So I want to welcome you. But what we're going to do is I've set aside an hour, and I really have an hour and a half. Oftentimes people ask questions, so an hour and a half is what you might plan on that. If you do need to stop, there are restrooms just down the hall, and there's beverages in the back. My purpose is to give you information so you have some framework for how you deal with your future. When we talk about estate planning, we just don't talk about when you drop over dead. We talk about what if you don't die. That's much worse. And statistically, you have a 70% chance of needing care once you pass age 65. And that's pretty crummy. That means in your home, assisted living, or skilled care. And that's very expensive. So we're going to address that as well. This is an interactive group. So what that means is you're going to participate as well as me. So don't worry about that. This is not a quiz. You can't pass or fail. I just want to be able to be sure I hit all the points you want to address. Before we do that, though, let me go through what was in this booklet that was given to you this morning by Terry. On the right side, there are two brochures. One is information about my law office. In my office, we exclusively represent people who are retired or anticipating retirement to help them plan their future and the future for their families. But there's also a pamphlet about certified elder law attorneys. I'm one of about 500 nationwide. What that means is I had to have had a long time of practicing in this area, pass a test, do a whole bunch of things to continue to stay up to date in this. Of course, I'm just like many other attorneys, and so I thought, no big deal. I've done this a lot. I'll just take the test and get the certification, and I flunked flat. That was over a decade ago. So I studied hard for the second time around, passed it, and keep doing all the things I can do to stay up to date. There's also a green sheet. I'll tell you how to fill that out later on if you want to meet with me. I've provided two forms for you that you may want to fill out yourself if you don't have them. And if you want, you can reproduce them, give them to all your friends. There are living wills and health powers of attorney. I'll talk about how you fill those out just a little bit later. On the other side, on the left side, there's a brief biography of me. I'm not going to tell you all the things I've done. You can read that, or you can go to my website for that. If you want, I put out twice a month what's called a blog, which is really a newsletter that comes through the computer. One is a video that's about 1 or 2 minutes on a topic that's associated with estate planning, and the other one is an article that I actually write. And so here's a sample of one of them. If you want to sign up for that, there's space on that green sheet to do that, and I'll collect that later on, or Terry will. And lastly, there's a sheet for notes. So let's get started. As I said, most people approach estate planning by, the vast majority do nothing. It depends on whose statistic you look at, but some people say only 60% have an estate plan in place when they die. That's kind of poor, because then we have to figure out what do we do. So, and then as I mentioned, then there's the issue about long-term care. How do you pay for that? So before I start getting into all these different techniques and concerns that you might want to have about getting old, I want you to take just 2 minutes, and there's paper on your table that the hotel provided, or you can use what I provided. If you'd write down your top 3 fears about aging. What are you really worried about? Because I want to be sure I address that today. And I'm going to have Terry write them on a board, and to be sure that I address them by the end of this meeting. So if you would just share that with me, and what are you worried about? Well, you put down your pencil, so I'll start with you.
Getting old.
Getting old. Yeah, we're all on that same conveyor belt.
Sick, and you get sick.
Yep.
And when you die, what happens? What's going to happen?
What's
with the family?
Oh, okay. So getting old, getting sick, and what happens to the family when you die? And we'll address those. Okay, and you, did you have something?
I just put senility, no long-term care insurance, and which child is going to care for me.
Yes, senility, no long-term care insurance, and which child is going to step up and do what they need to do. You know, I don't know about you, but I go to the kitchen and I say, why am I here? I have to go back to the bedroom and, and say, and every time I do that I say, oh, am I getting demented?
Yeah.
But I don't think that that's the criteria, so.
At least if you can remember when you get back to your
Yeah, when you go where you went and then come back.
Yes, so far.
You, sir, did you have something in addition?
Yeah, care of myself, in later years. Do I go to a care center or what? That's
Okay.
fine.
Yeah, that is a concern for all of us. Was there anything else?
No, not really.
Okay, and you? Okay. Oh, you have a wonderful script. Declining health. Yeah, and finances. What does finances mean to you?
Will I be able to have enough money to take care of myself?
Yeah, will you run out of money? And will you be able to stay independent? Okay, cool. We'll address those things. By the way, I have a magic wand up front that's totally worthless, but sometimes it's fun to just play with it. I had one person in a program like this who wanted to, go back to be like 35, and I just bonked him on the head and said, there you are. That's as good as I can do. What did you have?
Well, I think you pretty much addressed those.
Oh, long-term care?
Where?
You mean in which facility you're thinking of? And will you have enough money, or will you outlive your money? Yeah, that's a concern, and I will address those. Did you have something in addition?
All up there.
They're there?
Yeah, pretty much, with different wording,
Yeah.
maintaining my lifestyle, whether I will be mobile,
Yeah.
be able to function on my own.
Yeah, to get around that really makes a difference. You, sir, did you have something in
Pretty
addition?
well covered. Financial security was addressed up there. So.
Okay, good. And you?
Addressed.
Okay. And let me just comment on a couple of other things that were in the Wall Street Journal yesterday. They talked about caregivers, and they talked about young people now. Young people in their 20s and 30s are being caregivers for their parents and grandparents, and how much that impacts on their lives. So it's the issue is, if one concern for a lot of people is, will I be a caregiver, or who's going to be my caregiver? Another article, which was just frightening, which was on Monday in the New York Times, and they have a front page article, bankruptcy booms among older Americans as safety net phrase. And they're talking about the increased bankruptcies of seniors, and that's because they live longer, they have medical expenses, their insurance doesn't cover it, their retirement benefits don't cover their costs of living. And these are frightening issues. And you've identified them. Even driving up here, I was listening on public radio, and they were having a program just about the bankruptcy issues for seniors and why that's becoming such a big problem. Well, and that's grim. You all want to go home and just cry right now. So let me start talking about ways you can address this. I've been doing estate planning for a long time, and I've discovered there really is a pattern for planning. I'm going to address all these things, but I'm not going to start one by one because it's like swatting flies. I'm going to give you a structure first, and then I'll be sure to cover this at the end if I haven't in the meantime. If you have questions as I go along, please ask them, or wait till the end and I'm happy to address them. The questions that you ask, please make them general questions. Don't tell me that my brother-in-law just had a whatever it is and I need to deal with that. I can't tell you about that because these are detailed answers, and I need a lot of information. You'll understand why in a moment. When we do estate planning, there are 3 pillars of estate planning. The first one is figure out where you are and where you want to go. What's your current situation, and what do you want to do for the rest of your life? The second one is, okay, once you figure that out, what kind of plan can you come up with that bridges that gap? Okay, if you're here and you want to go there while you're healthy, should you decline, and when you're gone, how do we get you where you want to be? And then the third one is actually, once you come up with a plan, do something about it. Don't just talk about it, say, yeah, I'll get to it next week or next year. Actually do it and then implement it. Keep it up to date and coordinate your assets with your plan. So let's talk about the first one. And that's assessing your current situation. So this is homework for those of you, all of you. It doesn't hurt even if you've done an estate plan in the last couple of months. You go home tonight or tomorrow and you take out some pieces of paper, and the first thing you write down is, who do you like? Who's going to inherit from you? Is it going to be your kids, your grandkids, your dog? I just heard about a survey that they surveyed some moms, and 40% of the moms said they like their dog better than their kids. You know, so who knows? But, you know, you have a charity that you care about, you know, write down who it is you really intend to receive property from you. A good friend, a neighbor. Then also on another sheet of paper, that same sheet of paper, who's going to step up and help you when you need it? Who's going to come help you at 2 in the morning when you're just suffering from food poisoning and you'd rather die than you know, I don't know about you, the few times I've had that, it's been awful. You know, so, or who can come, or who's going to look at the phone and say, oh, you're calling, I'm not coming. You know, who do you know who will actually step up and help you when you reach out and ask for help? And if, I'm talking about your health and just basic support. If you don't have anybody, that's useful information because we can fill that gap. There are people and companies in this community that do that. And then who is going to take care of your finances if you can't do that? If you're mentally or physically not capable of handling your finances, who can you rely on to actually pay your bills and not leave town with your money? And again, if you don't have anybody, we have people in this community who can do that. And then when you're dead, who's going to take care of everything? Who's going to do what you want them to do? Could be these people you've identified earlier, could be somebody totally different. The next piece of paper you're going to pull out is for a balance sheet. Now this is not like you're applying for a house or car loan, it's just we need some approximate numbers. So you're going to start writing down what do you own and what it's worth. So if you own your home and you don't know what it's worth, look at the assessed value that the county gave it. That at least puts you in the ballpark. If you own a cabin up in Cascade, write that down. If you have, you know, vehicles, put down an approximate value. What do you normally keep in your bank accounts? What's the value of your retirement accounts, your IRAs, your 401ks, your deferred comp? What do you have in mutual funds, stocks, bonds, brokerage accounts? Do you have any annuities? What's your life insurance death benefit? And what's the savings account, the cash value in your life insurance, if you've got that? Do you have rich relatives that are going to die and send you money? And if that happens, what do you think it might be and when do you think you might get it? Not too many people say yes to that, but that's okay. If you have major debts, a mortgage, a car loan, large charge cards balances, write that down and then total the whole thing up. The next thing you're going to do is figure out what you've got for documents now. So go look at your deed. Go look at the titles on your vehicles. Look at the bank statements. Look at all the things that come through the mail on a monthly or quarterly basis that shows you who's the titled owner of an item. And then who are the beneficiaries? Who'd you put down as the beneficiary of your retirement account? Or who is the beneficiary of your life insurance? And who's the contingent beneficiary if that first person isn't available? Okay, that's assessing your current situation. And then the next thing you need to do is figure out what do you want to do for the rest of your life. You know, and that means the good days. So you probably still want to continue to be in charge of your affairs and do what you want to do and not have anybody tell you what to do. But again, who's going to step up and do it when you can't do it? And what if you decline? Do you really plan to stay in your home for the rest of your life? Most people want that. Most people say, you know, the AARP does studies and they say like 90% of the people say they want to stay in their own home. Well, that's cool, but make it possible. And by that I mean, be realistic. Get those rugs up if you are starting to trip on the rugs. You know, fix the lighting so it's bright enough for you. In my office, I had to have somebody come in and put extra lights in because I just couldn't see as well as I used to. You know, put the grab bars in the bathroom, do the common sense thing so you can really stay in your home safely. Or you may say, no, I don't want to do that. I had a client I talked to yesterday. She's ready to move into an independent living retirement home because she's not very mobile anymore, and she loves to play cards, and she had 12 friends over last week to play cards at her house, and she said, and she's 90, so she said, you know, I'd work for about 10 minutes and I had to sit down. I just kept getting so tired. She says, I can't do this anymore, but I don't want to not have my friends, so she's going to move to an independent living. So that's an alternative, or assisted living. Or you're going to move across town to be near the grandkids. I mean, you figure it out, and it's nice if you decide it rather than it's a crisis and then somebody else has to step in and try to deal with that. The other thing is, of course, when you're gone. The only guarantee I can give you is you will die. Me too. I mean, this is it. Forget the taxes. The death is a certainty. And so you might want to prearrange your funeral and do some things like that so it's easy for your family to come along behind you, because it's a hard thing to do when someone dies. So that's assessing your current situation and what do you want to do for the rest of your life in terms of your goals. Now we have to figure out, okay, how do we get you there? As I said, the most common plan is this one. I love this. This was a cartoon in the New Yorker. The life-changing magic of shoving everything into a huge hefty bag and leaving it for someone else to deal with. Cool. It's okay for you. You got the easy way out. You're dead. It's not your problem anymore, but it's a mess for someone else. So that's really not a very appropriate way to do it. And if, in fact, you happen to be in that category, what happens is the Idaho legislature has figured out what to do with your property when you die. If you're a single person, what happens is if you have children, it'll go to your children equally, and if you don't have children, it'll go up to your folks, and if your folks are gone, it'll go up to your brothers and sisters, and so forth. And eventually, if you really are an orphan and don't have any relatives, it'll go to the state of Idaho Department of Education, which is not bad, but if you really want to do that, it'd be nice if you'd give it to them directly. The other issue is if you're married and you die without, and thank you for turning that off, because I find that distracting, obviously. If you're a married person and you die, you know, a lot of you have been married for a long, long time, and you know, you think it's all community property, which perhaps it is. We're a community property state, which means the presumption is for a married couple, all the property they own belongs to the two of them. And when you die, all you can do is give away what you own. So you can give away, when you're dead as a married person, your half of the community property. But there's another kind of property married people have, and that's called separate property, meaning they owned it before the marriage, or they received it as a gift or an inheritance just to them during the term of the marriage. And when you have no will in place, and you die, and you've got separate property as a married person, the law says, well, some goes to your spouse, some goes to your kids, or maybe some goes to your parents. I mean, it gets kind of messy. So that's not so great. And even though you've been married for a long time and you say, Susan, I don't care, I know my spouse is going to get it all, you will have to probate the estate of that spouse to die if you own real property. Because how are you going to sign on the deed to sell the house? The house is too big, it's got too much irrigating, you want to sell it and move close to your kids or whatever. How do you, the surviving spouse, sell the house? You have to probate the estate. You have to file a petition with the court that says, hey judge, my spouse is dead, I want to handle things. That's called the personal representative here in Idaho. We call them executor, administrators, other places. But anyway, I want to be able to gather up my husband's or my wife's assets. Please appoint me as personal representative. So that's the probate process, and the judge appoints that spouse as the personal representative, and then they have the power to sign the deed. And if you say, well, that's just bunk, I'm not doing that, how do you sell the house? You can go down to the real estate person and show the death, you know, the title company, show the death certificate, your marriage certificate, your driver's license. They're going to say, so what? You know, we got another person's name on this, a dead person. Who can sign on behalf of the dead person? I was married during the Vietnam War. My husband was in the Marines. He was a helicopter pilot, and we were married 3 months before he went off to Vietnam. And I learned how to forge his signature in about 2 weeks. So, you know, you all probably at some time or another have forged your spouse's signature, but you can't do that for a dead person. You're sitting in front of a notary public. They are not going to notarize the signature for a dead person. So you have to probate the estate. Same thing if you're a single person. Probate means we got a dead person's name on a titled asset. And the law says when a dead person is on real property, their name is on real property, the deed to something, or the cumulative value of their titled assets, their vehicles, their bank accounts, their money, CDs, their mutual funds exceed $100,000, you have to probate their estate. So probate means somebody's got to go to court to get appointed to be able to sign on behalf of the dead person and have the power to grab the assets, protect the assets, and ultimately distribute them out the way they're supposed to go. And at this point, we don't have any direction other than the Idaho Code telling us where it goes. The other issue about having no plan in place is what if you become incompetent? I really don't wish this on my enemies, but nonetheless, statistically, once you pass 65, you have at least a 70% chance of needing care before you die, in the home, in assisted living, or nursing homes. And this is pretty much everybody's approach to long-term care. Not me. It's not going to happen to me. That was my father-in-law's approach. He said, you know, if I'm never going into a home, and I'm just going to shoot myself. If I get old enough, I just don't want to deal with it anymore. Well, you know, he was a very crabby man. But, you know, he had a sweet underlay, but his backup plan was I was supposed to shoot him, which I told him wasn't going to work. You know, I couldn't do, I'm a lawyer and I know how to draw up fancy documents, have a gold seal with ribbons and all that sort of stuff. I said, even that is not going to keep me out of the state penitentiary. So what happened was one day, and he was so difficult. If I called him every day, he wouldn't answer the phone, make him mad. If I knocked by his door on the way after work, he'd, you know, say, how you doing, Dad? He didn't like that either, so I'd only visit him on Saturdays, have a whiskey, we'd chew the fat, and then I'd come back the next Saturday. And he fell down on a Tuesday, and the cleaning ladies came on a Thursday. He was on the floor, unfortunately, for 2 days. I felt terrible. He was in intensive care for a month at St. Luke's. He ended up across the street at the Elks. Then he ended up at the Marquis, which is a skilled nursing facility. It took about, I don't know, 5 or 6 months before he got back home. Cost about $50,000 out of pocket. You know, and this is a stupid plan. I know it's a comfortable one, but this is a reality. I'm not making these numbers up. So let's talk about if you become incompetent. So I'm going down the street. I have no plan in place, and I drop my purse. Okay, I have a stroke. I have a car wreck. I can't pick it up. I'm going to be in the hospital or in rehab for quite a while. Who can sign on my behalf to pay my bills, and who can make the medical decisions for me? It will be necessary for somebody to petition the court and say, so we're back in the probate court, hey Judge, Susan's a mess. I'm willing to assume the responsibility of handling her finances. That's the person who's called a conservator. And they also may be the same person who'll say, I would like to be her guardian, which means they make the medical and housing decisions for me. Okay, well, so how does this work? That means the petitioner. So let's say I'm married. And the petitioner is my husband of 50 years. He has an attorney, and he says, I want to be appointed judge because I've got to sell the house. She's never coming back to the house, and I can't sign on her behalf. The law requires that another attorney will be appointed for me, the incapacitated person, even if we'd been married for 50 years. And then there's a third attorney who's often appointed, and that person is called the visitor. And this is somebody who independently goes around, talks to everybody, and makes a report to the judge recommending what's best for me. In addition, there has to be a doctor's evaluation to show, yeah, I really am a mess and I can't handle things for myself. Those proceedings usually cost, in Ada County, between $5,000 and $10,000. You can understand pretty quickly, you got 4 professionals here, so that runs up the bill. And takes about 3 months to get appointed. You have to file annual accountings once you're appointed, even if you've been married for 50 years, showing what you're doing with the money. And if you say it's none of your business, that spouse will be fired and an independent person will be appointed to handle the finances. And it's the same thing for a single person, you know. Is it one of your children or a neighbor or a good friend, or who's going to step up and do this for you? The reason it's that way is people freely steal from incapacitated individuals. And there's tons of statistics about that, which is dreadful, and shame on them, but it doesn't matter. So they make these laws more and more cumbersome, in my personal opinion, which makes it harder for the good people to be good, and that makes it, you know, you're going to be a crook. You'll figure some way to wiggle your way through this system, as far as I can see. But so that's what happens if you have no plan in place and you become incapacitated. So let's start making some improvements here. One of the things you can do is you can sign those documents that I have in that packet. There's a living will and a health power of attorney. Our legislature has made those documents combined into one. And those are health documents. So the living will says if a doctor says you're going to die soon, you have a terminal illness, your death is imminent, that means you're knocking at death's door, or you're in a persistent vegetative state, you get all the pain pills you want, and you get 3 choices. The first one says find every fancy machine out there and keep you going as long as possible. The next one says don't bother with that, but do give me nutrition and hydration with tubes. I'm talking nose tubes, stomach tubes, out with tubes. Third one says just keep me comfortable and let me go. And then there's a combined health power of attorney. Who can talk to the doctor on your behalf when you can't communicate effectively? You have to sign those documents. I say have to. I mean, you don't have to, but if you don't, it's a mess. Because the legal and medical system, if you haven't signed it, will put you on the tubes. And also, who's your agent? You've all bumped into the HIPAA rules, okay, which is a health insurance privacy law. And what that law says is if the healthcare providers talk to anybody without your express written permission, they can go to jail and pay a substantial fine. So they don't want to do that. So you need to sign it because that power of attorney has a HIPAA waiver in there that says it's okay, judge, you, or a doctor, you can talk to these people I've identified. You need a financial power of attorney. The financial power of attorney that's in this packet also says who can sign your checks if you can't do it, and who's an alternate. You need alternates in all of these things in case the first person you've named isn't available. They predecease you. They don't want the job. They're not capable of it anymore. So you need to have a couple of alternates in there. Another thing you can do is you can, as a married couple, sign a contract. It's called a community property agreement or a devolution agreement. It's just a little agreement that says we don't care who dies first, the other one gets everything. And the legal description for our house is Lot 2, Block 10 of the Franklin subdivision. And you record that in the county recorder's office. Then when one of you dies, it's easy. The surviving spouse just gets a certified copy of the death certificate. They file it at the county courthouse with a little affidavit that says my spouse is dead, put the house in my name, and that's the way that happens. So skip that probate. Did you have a question? It's called a community property agreement. That's the most common way it's referred to. And those forms are available on the Idaho Legal Aid website. Those are easy forms to fill out. And you need... It's only for spouses. A community property agreement only applies for spouses. And you need to record one in every county where you own the land. So if you own something up in Valley County, you have to file a different one in Valley County with the legal description of the property in Valley County. It doesn't count for anything in Oregon. If you happen to own something, I'm pointing over toward Oregon, but if you happen to own a rental over in Ontario and you die, we would have to probate your estate in Oregon as well as the state of Idaho, because every one of the states control the land within their boundaries, so you have to have a separate probate in those states. Another thing you can, yes?
What was the website that you said?
Idaho Legal Aid, and they have, if you go to the Idaho Legal Aid website, and they have a section that are forms to fill out that are interactive, and they're great. So that's another source you can look to for that document. You can make beneficiary designations on your life insurance, your IRAs, your 401ks, your annuities, your deferred comp. That's cool. You can make paid on death, POD accounts for your banks, you know, your checking, your savings, your certificates of deposit. These are all simple and easy. The problem is that they don't handle complex things. If you make it POD to a grandchild, you know, my office is on 4th Street, and it's 2 blocks away from the YMCA. And I live right next door to my office. I'm right down from St. John's and the Boise Co-op. And I go to the YMCA a couple times a week to exercise, and I go right through that Boise High campus. And those kids are coming back next week or the week after. And when I walk through that campus at 10 in the morning, they're out on their morning break, and there are many 18-year-olds in this crowd of kids that are out there. And the law says they're grown up at age 18, which is, bet me. I mean, I've turned into my mother and grandmother. I look at their hair and what they're wearing, and I just can hardly believe it. So when you have a young child inheriting money, they're 18, it's their money, and they have no ability to know how to manage it. So you need to be careful when you name beneficiary designations. Are you really having the appropriate people actually inherit them? You can write a will, a last will and testament. You all know about that, and every one of us in this room is okay for signing one. You have to be over age 18. You have to technically do it right. You have to be competent. That's a very low standard. That means you need to know who you are. You need to know who your immediate family is and what you own and the approximate value. That's it. You don't need to know that you're in Boise, Idaho, or who the President of the United States is. And you can't be under undue influence. That means I can't put my mother in the basement and say, I'm never letting you out until you sign the will and you give it all to me and you let me be the personal representative. And that's basically the undue influence. So let's assume you have a proper will. What you say in there, who's going to be in charge? Again, the personal representative. And who's an alternate? Is it going to be your spouse, a child, a good friend? Is it going to be a professional? Sometimes people use me or they use their CPAs. They often appoint banks with trust departments who are professional fiduciaries, and they know what they're doing, and they're not a member of your family. And often that's really a smart move when you have blended families. Because the kids on one side, I don't care how sweet and nice they are while everybody's alive, it does sort of collapses when somebody dies. And so if you have one child on one side being the personal representative, the kids on the other side, it doesn't matter what they do, they're not going to think it's right. You also need to say who gets your stuff, who gets the ring, who gets the painting, who gets the gun. And then you address the bulk of your estate. You could say I give the cabin to somebody, but then finally we get to the remainder. Who's getting the bulk of your estate? And that would be my spouse, my kids, a charity, whatever. If you're giving money to young people, I strongly encourage people to say, no, you don't get it till you're 30. I'm holding my hand up. I mean, this could be a linebacker at Boise State, but they don't have the skills to know how to handle money. There are studies that show, God knows why anybody did a study, but there are studies that show young people don't wake up until their late 20s. That means, and the boys are worse than the girls. That means hold down a job, keep your car payment current, don't bounce your checks, move out of the house, start to get on with being an adult in this world. So if that's true, then you want to say, okay, I want that money there for them until they're 30 or whatever age you say they finally get the money with no strings. They can pay for down payment of a house, buy a car, pay for their schooling, whatever you feel is appropriate. And then you need to address, what if somebody dies first? So you wrote this will and everything seems great, but then 6 months later or 6 years later, somebody dies that you've identified in there. Who gets their share? Those are important things to address in a will. So, okay, now you have a will in place and you drop over dead. What's different? The difference is it's going to be the way you want it to be. The person that you want in charge is going to be there, the personal representative, and the people that you want to have inherit from you are going to inherit. But if my mother wrote a will that says everything goes to me and I'm the personal representative and I say, skip this probate thing, that's stupid, I'm just going to sell her house. So I go with the will down to the real estate closing and I take my birth certificate, my mother's death certificate, my driver's license and say, see, I get it all, give me the sale proceeds from the house. They're going to say, no. We don't know that you have the power to sign on behalf of your mother. Yeah, the will says this, but we don't know if she did another will after that. I do lots of wills for people that it's, their third or fourth or fifth will. We don't know whether she was competent. We don't know that it's technically done right. We don't know whether she was undue influence. We are real estate closing people. We are not a judge. You go get an order from the court that says you can sign. So even though the will is done properly, it will still be necessary to probate that estate. And for a married couple, as I said, you can avoid the first probate if you own land in Idaho, you don't own land someplace else, and you've done that community property agreement. But if not, then you still have to probate the estate. Well, there's another way you can do an estate plan, and that's using a revocable trust. These are little boxes that I created. I really enjoy and love being an attorney, but when I go home, I'm done. So I do a lot of art projects, so these are all covered in glitter, which is just fun for me. So a trust. A trust is like you set up a little business. Okay, it's just like a lemonade stand, just a small little business. And what it says, it's all these pieces of paper, but what it says is you're in charge of your affairs for as long as you want. But if you can't do it anymore, you resign, you're incompetent, or you're dead, you name who's going to back you up. A spouse, it could be the two of you together, or just the survivor of the two of you, but if you're single, again, it could be a friend, could be a relative, could be a child, could be a bank that has a trust department. They're the ones that back you up. And then it says who gets your property when you're gone. It also says use the money for your benefit for the rest of your life. So that's cool. So how do you really make this work? Well, that's just a lot of hot air. So what we need to do to make this work, remember I said what's driving us into court when somebody's sick or somebody's dead is we've got a titled asset in a dead person's name or a sick person's name. Who can sign on behalf of that individual? So now we're going to change the titles to the trust name. So I'm going to put my house in the name of Susan Graham, trustee of the Susan Graham Trust. So there it goes. And I have a family farm in Camas County, so I do a deed up there and put it in the name of the trust. I own a rental over in Ontario, so I get an Oregon attorney to do a deed to put it in the name of the trust. I take my brokerage account, put it in the name of the trust. I make my IRA, the beneficiary is the trust, and my checking account, it's a POD account into the trust. My life insurance, the beneficiary is the trust. Okay, so everything's in the trust now, or drops in automatically when I die with the beneficiary or the POD designation. Okay, so I'm doing this as a single person. Again, you can do this as married people as well. So now what happens? I've got everything in the trust. I don't like that broker anymore, so I take that brokerage account out. So a check is going to be written to me, Susan Graham, trustee of the Susan Graham Trust for $50,000 or whatever that amount is. And then I take it down the street and put it in another brokerage account. And they're going to open it up in my name, trustee of my trust. They're going to use my social security number. My taxes stay exactly the same. So I can put stuff in and take stuff out whenever I want. But now I drop over dead. What happens? Who can sign on behalf of me to follow my instructions? Well, it's the trustee. The money manager in a trust is called the trustee. So that person, so I'll name Terry, and I'll say, Terry, you're my trustee. So Terry then will get a certified copy of my death certificate. She'll sign a paper that says she'll take the job. She files that at the courthouse. She's instantly in charge. So it takes 5 to 10 days, maybe a little longer to get a death certificate, so it's not that long. Then her job is to gather up my assets, protect them, pay the bills, and then ultimately distribute it to the people who are supposed to get it. Pretty easy. The other thing is, what if I drop my purse? I have a car wreck, or I have a stroke. How many people will it take to pick it up? How much is it going to cost? How long will it take? Terry's going to get a statement from the doctor that says Susan's a mess and can't handle her affairs. She's going to sign a paper that says, I agree, I'll take the job. She files that at the courthouse, she's instantly in charge. Usually it takes 5 days or so. We've had doctors provide us that statement in 1 day. So she's instantly in charge, and she'll have a paper from the court that she can take down to the bank or down to my broker, or if she needs to sell my house because I'm never coming back to that house, she can sign the deed, Terry, trustee of the Susan Graham Trust. So she's not hiring a lawyer to represent her, a lawyer to represent me, another person to be the visitor. She does have to have the doctor's statement, and it's private. Now, she has the power to take all my money and go to Mexico. Okay, so you have to pay attention who you're nominating as the person, as your trustee, or the one who's going to handle your finances when you're gone. And oftentimes it's really appropriate to consider naming a bank to do that. A bank with a trust department. Not all the banks have that. So that's what's nice about this, is that it covers, I'm in charge for the rest of my life for as long as I want to. But if I get too demented to do it, and I'm too crabby and I won't resign, you've been around a few people like that, probably in your life experience, you know, you can do an end run around it by getting the doctor's statement. Or you know, the one day I just say, I can't do this anymore, I don't want to do it anymore, I can resign. And then, of course, when I'm dead, somebody can take over. There are other kinds of, and trusts aren't perfect for everybody, but again, we avoided the probate in Oregon when I died. We don't have to do that because we don't have a dead person's name on a titled asset of the land in Oregon. It's in the name of the trust. And we avoid the Idaho probate. There are other kinds of trusts that some people use, and these are some of my other boxes. And one of them is this. Many of my clients like this. We call it an inheritance trust. It's called a dynasty trust, lots of different names. So let me tell you why people like using this. You die and you give $300,000 to your son. And then your son dies a couple of years later. That's going to his wife. It's not going to the grandchildren, it's going to his wife. That's the way his estate plan is set up. And then his wife remarries and dies. I'll bet you money, husband number 2 ends up with the $300,000, not the grandchildren. That's very common. So that's one of the ways you deal with this. If you set this up, you say, no, I'm giving the $300,000 to my son in this irrevocable trust. Okay? He can manage it, he can invest it however he wants. If he ever gets divorced, his wife is not getting a dime of this. Also, this is an asset protection trust, so if he gets in a car wreck and gets sued for $1 zillion and somebody is knocking on his door, there's not enough insurance to cover it, and says, I know you owe me $100,000, and it's in here, give me that $100,000, he can just say, go away. They can't take this. It's protected from bankruptcy. And then when he dies, this will go down to the grandchildren, and they get the same protection for future generations, and we say the grandchildren can't manage it until they're 30 or whatever you decide.
What kind of trust is that?
We call this an inheritance trust. It's an irrevocable trust. There are lots of different names for it. But what's the point of getting an inheritance if you can't spend it? I mean, you want them to do something with it besides just hold on to it and give it to the grandkids. And so we lawyers are very clever, and so we have a trapdoor. So when he wants, he can take the money out. Nobody's going to complain about what he takes out. But whenever anybody's knocking at the door saying, you have to give me money for that car wreck, or I'm getting divorced from you, I want some of this money, or he's in bankruptcy, this is never available for that. So that's another planning technique that some people like to use.
Is that with all trusts?
No, this would be an irrevocable trust. This is a separate kind of trust. Each one of these boxes is a different type of trust. And the reason I had the boxes is all these words that come out of my mouth, it's hard to remember them. So sometimes the visuals are easier. We have another kind of trust that we set up, and that's for people who have disabled individuals that are receiving disability benefits. You know, and a lot of people, unfortunately, have children or family members who are on disability, and if they receive an inheritance, they will lose it. So, because often the disability benefits say if you have more than $2,000, you can't get the disability, the Social Security disability, so, or another disability program that might be available to them. So we put their share in here. And it's used to just supplement their disability payments. They can't count it. They can't throw them off of the disability. And then when that individual dies, this goes, whatever's left in it, wherever you said it goes. It doesn't go back to the state to reimburse them. So those are some planning techniques in terms of dealing with while you're doing great and then what happens when you die. Now let me talk about, though, the elephant in the room, which is what happens if you become incapacitated and have to pay for that. You know, there's a chart over there another attorney friend of mine created and was nice enough to let me reproduce it. And it starts out, you know, you retire in your 50s, 60s, whenever, and you know, and you're playing golf and tennis and going to lunch with your friends and all that sort of stuff, and slowly your friends kind of disappear or get demented or move away or whatever, and your world kind of shrinks, and then your health, even, I don't care how many vitamins you take or how much yoga you do, you know, I'm sorry, in my family, all the women, they live forever, but they definitely are falling apart in their mid-80s and their 90s. So how do you deal with that? Now, you can stay in your own home as you decline. As I mentioned, you need to be sure that that's really safe and appropriate for you. But then if you start to bring caregivers into your home, those cost these days $20 to $25 an hour for a bath aide or somebody like that to come into your home. and you may need help for a few hours a week or a day. And then the next, or if you want to stay in your home and you really need 24-hour care, my clients are paying $11,000 to $16,000 a month for that, which is, okay, how many months is my money going to last at that rate? Then the next thing is, okay, you're too isolated in your home and you really need more help, and it's not cost effective to stay in your home, so you move to assisted living. Assisted living costs on average $4,500 a month, up to $6,000. Depends on assisted living means you need a little help with a few things. You can do some stuff. You maybe can get dressed, or maybe you need help getting dressed. My cousin I was responsible for, she moved into assisted living, she was about 92, and she wanted to be queen. So she spent the whole day on the buzzer, Please come, do this. Assisted living, you've got to do some stuff on your own. So she lasted about 2 months in assisted living and ended up in skilled nursing care. Cost $9,000 a month. And I started praying that she would die before we ran out of money, which didn't happen, thankfully, because she was extremely demented and very ill. And then you go to skilled nursing care. In this valley, it's $8,000 to $10,000 a month. So how do you deal with that? How do you really come up with paying for that? Well, one of the ways is you pay for it out of pocket. And then a lot of people just buck up and do that. And you can say, well, my son or daughter is going to step in and do things for me. I talked to a son and his mother on Monday, and the son lives 4 doors down. The mom lives independently, but she really shouldn't be. She doesn't cook anymore. He doesn't cook, and he doesn't eat very often. And his mother's a diabetic, and he says, this is getting to be a problem. Well, of course it's getting to be a problem. It's been a problem quite a bit before they walked into my office. And she's going to go into assisted living, where she's going to get some help with some things, because she doesn't cook. And she needs help with her medications and so forth. And then the problem is selecting that particular place. Paying for that, she actually has not quite enough money to pay for that with her Social Security and pension, but there's some other money that she can draw on, and a few $1,000s a month, and so her money ought to last her another 10 years. The other way you pay for it, and if you want to stay in your home, you can go get a reverse mortgage. That's another possibility if you're running out of money, and I'm a big fan of it. Not initially, but if you're really getting tight, you want to stay in your home, there's a lot of equity in that home, and you can loosen up that cash. I'm a huge fan of long-term care insurance, which I'm going to ask Josh Hosington to talk about in just a moment. And then you go into the government programs. You go into Medicare, Medicaid, and the VA. And that's part of what this article is about. The safety nets are going away. It says, this headline is bankruptcy brooms among older Americans as safety nets fray. Unless you've been living under a rock, and none of you have, because at least you come here, so you obviously have some exposure to what's going on in this world. We have a deficit in this country. We have a significant deficit that gets higher every day. And the problem with that is that nobody seems to be addressing it. So how do you deal with this? And one of the ways our government is dealing with this is cutting the access to the social safety nets. And it's happening. It's been happening for years, and it's going to continue to happen unless somebody bucks up one day and says, this is a real problem. There are 3 ways that government programs get involved for paying long-term residential care. One is Medicare. That's health insurance for people 65 and older. But there's a piece in there that deals with residential care, only for a maximum of 100 days. One of the ways it is if you fall down or you have a serious illness and you are admitted to the hospital and you're in the hospital for 3 or more days, and then you get discharged to a rehab facility like the Elks, Medicare will pay 100% of the expense of you being in the Elks for the first 20 days, which is good. The bills I've seen and my other attorney friends have seen, it ranges between $6,000 and $45,000 for those 20 days. So you want that. You have paid for this insurance. You paid for that as with deductions from your payroll. And then if you're still in the rehab, then Medicare will pay part and your supplemental insurance will pay part for the next 80 days. So a maximum of 100 days, and then you're on your own. You're cheated out of this benefit because oftentimes you won't be in the hospital for 3 or more days. You'll only be in there 2 days, and it doesn't cover the rehab. In addition, they say you're not admitted to the hospital, you're there for observation. You could be there for 4 weeks for observation, and the Medicare won't cover it. Okay? It's a way of cheating people. There's a bill in Congress that's been kicked in the corner that nobody's doing anything about that says observation admitted, who cares? It's the same thing. It's the hot potato. They're passing it around, seeing who's stuck paying the bill. If that happens to you, you can't deal with it. You're in there, you're sick. Somebody needs to be an advocate for you. And you need to pay attention who you name on those health powers of attorney. There's a handout, and we have extra copies over there if you're interested in it, that's put out by the Center for Medicare Advocacy, and they talk about the observation status and what you might be able to do to get it shifted into admitted. So that's the Medicare. At least it covers, if you get admitted and you're there for 3 or more days, the 20 days and the 80 days. Then the next program is the VA. How many of you are veterans or spouses of veterans? Okay, the VA benefits are great, but you have to qualify for them, and my clients don't qualify for them, most of them. I represent the middle class and modest people. I don't represent zillionaires. Oh, by the way, I haven't talked about the death tax. Nobody cares about the death tax anymore. They've changed the death tax state. So in the state of Idaho, death tax is called an inheritance tax, and the federal death tax is called an estate tax. And what they say is when you drop over dead, if you have, and you're single, if you have more than $11 million, you have to pay a death tax on the excess. I don't know anybody who has $11 million. And then if you're a married couple, you can double that. And supposedly the law says, who knows what they'll change by the time we get there, in 2026, if you're a single person, if you have more than $5.5 million, then you pay no death tax, and you can double that again for a married couple. They say there are going to be 1,000 death tax returns filed this year in this country. We have, 350 million people? It's nobody. So forget the death tax, okay? Sorry, I got segued onto the death tax. So let me go back to VA. I don't know how I got from VA to the death tax, but anyway. The VA benefits. To qualify for that, you have to be over 65. That's easy. You have to, when talking long-term residential care, you're paying somebody coming into your home, or you're in assisted living, or you're in a skilled nursing facility. And so there are a bunch of tests, one of which you or your spouse, the military person, has to have been on active duty for at least 90 days and 1 day during wartime. The wartime is World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and this Gulf War that doesn't end. Okay, but there's an asset test, and the asset test says you can have a house, and you can have a car, and the stuff in the house, and you can't have more than approximately $80,000 of other assets. So this is the VA plan, their rules. And if you want to get the benefit, you have to play by their rules. Well, my clients have done all the things everybody's told them to do. They've shoved their money into retirement accounts. They've got IRAs and 401ks and deferred comp, and they're worth more than $80,000. And so they can't qualify. You can't get that benefit. The other thing is, then the last program is the Medicaid program. Now, these rules are different than these rules. And VA is coming up with some changes that says if you give away your money, let's say you have a $100,000 CD, and you're a single veteran, and you want to give away that CD, so you now only have like $20,000, you give $80,000 to your kids. Well, this minute, that doesn't count, but they're changing the law, and it's working its way through Congress to say if you gave away the money within 3 years of applying for the VA benefit, you won't qualify. And if you have a $100,000 IRA, you can't give that away. If you give it away, you pay the tax on it. You know, because you have to take it out, and then you can give it away. So that's crazy. That doesn't make any sense, because about a third of that is going to go out in tax. Okay, so let me talk about the Medicaid program. This is a state and federal program. It's very generous, and it helps for married people. It's generous at the moment. There's no way it can stay at this level because we don't have any money in this country, remember that. And we have 10,000 people turning 65 every year. And statistically, they say that most of them, so we'll just use 50%, don't have adequate savings. It depends on what studies you look at. They say they have 25,000, 50,000, 100,000 set aside for the rest of their lives. So it just means, I'm just saying, there's no funds in our country to provide support for all these people, but nonetheless, the current Medicaid rules, if you're a married couple, and Uncle Frank is in the nursing home, and Betty's paying $8,000 a month, and she's got a nice house and $300,000 in CDs, every time she writes that $8,000 check, she's having a small panic attack, and it's getting bigger because she's saying, what about me? So the Medicaid rules say Betty can have, these rules are amazing, she can have a house of an unlimited value, okay? $5 million house, doesn't matter. Car of an unlimited value, she can have a Maserati, they don't care. 4 wheels and an engine and a steering wheel, that's all it takes. Stuff, they don't care. The IRAs, the retirement accounts, they ignore. Although Frank's retirement account has to go help pay for his care at the minimum distribution. And then she's got a $300,000 CD. Well, that's too much money. They say she's entitled to half of that, but the maximum she's entitled to is about $120,000. She can keep $120,000. That $180,000's got to go somewhere. And when that $180,000 is gone, then Frank can qualify for Medicaid. Well, she can pay the bills. She can keep writing those checks for Frank and pay her own bills. She can buy an exempt asset, so she could buy a more expensive car or a new dining room set, but after a while, it's, improve the house, but that's a lot of money. But she can buy an annuity. This is just one of these rules. It's strange. And there are other exceptions, but I'll use the annuity rule. So she could buy an annuity for $180,000, have it paid back to her over 3 years, and Frank will qualify for Medicaid the month after she buys the annuity. This is a special annuity. Don't go down to your insurance person and say, I want one of these special annuities. They don't know what you're talking about. And then Betty's sitting on all the assets. Frank's pension and Social Security are going to pay for, and his minimum distributions from his IRA are going to pay for his care. But Betty's got all the other assets. And then Frank dies, the state sends her a bill and says, oh, we paid $100,000 for Frank. Would you send us a check? She can throw that in the trash. She doesn't have to do that. And so Betty, sells the house and uses all of her money and takes a cruise ship around the world in first class until she runs out of money. She can do that. She can go down to jackpot, put the money on the table and lose it all. The only thing she can't do is she can't give it away, okay? Frank's been on Medicaid. She's got all the assets. The law says when Betty dies, the state's entitled to be reimbursed for the $100,000 they paid for Frank. And they're going to look at what does Betty own. So she's still got a house. They'll, get the $100,000 when the house is sold, or she's got money in the bank. But if she gave it away to her kids, they're going after the kids and coming and getting the money back. But it's very generous for married people. And there are many other exceptions on how you can qualify for Medicaid. If you want to plan ahead, you've got to plan at least 5 years ahead, and we do that sometimes. I have one client who came to me in his 70s, and he said, everybody by the late 70s in my family is demented. Seriously demented. I know that's going to happen to me. I want to protect my assets. And so we put his assets in an irrevocable trust. Not all of them. We left plenty of money to pay the bills for 5 years, because the Medicaid rules say if you give money away, you have to wait 5 years before you can apply. They'd say, we're not total fools here. I mean, you had $300,000 before, and you just gave it away, and you said, I don't have any money anymore. Put me on Medicaid. They're going to say, no, it's not happening. You have to wait the 5 years. So if we have 5 years or more, we can put money in an asset protection trust and protect that.
Now you're just talking cash, not asset.
Okay, any asset, anything that has a value. So land, you have gold bars in your safe deposit box. Those are a little harder to trace, but And when you apply, you have to tell the truth, because if you don't tell them that I gave $10,000 to my granddaughter for her to go to University of Idaho last year, you say it's none of your business, and I would have done that anyway because I'm a good grandmother. They're going to, if they ever find out, it's going to be denied, and it'll be denied forever, even if you ever should qualify in the future. Plus, they can put you in jail. We joke in this business that that's what, and some societies, in Japan, that the seniors are actually stealing stuff so that they can go to jail.
What happens if you put some money for your granddaughter's school, and it's her name and my husband's name, and it was for her schooling? Can she take that out? Or Back to school.
Yeah, the question is if you have an account that you set up for a grandchild's education and it's got the grandchild's name and your name or your spouse's name on it, can she use it for school? Sure she can. The only problem is, again, if you ever need to apply for Medicaid, they're going to look at that and say whose money was put in that account and was that within the last 5 years? And if you've still got access to it, your name is on that account and the grandchild, and you or your spouse can take the money out, they're going to count that as a resource that belongs to you, unless you can show that that actually belongs to the granddaughter, that the granddaughter put the money in. So
What happens if your husband is dead?
the same rules apply. If your husband died, who's the owner of that account? And again, did it occur within 5 years of applying for Medicaid? Those kinds of questions are very good questions, and the Medicaid rules are extremely complex. So whenever you run into a problem like that and you think, gee, I need to consider applying for Medicaid, I encourage you to go to 2 different resources. One is Idaho Legal Aid. They have a senior hotline. And of course, they're underfunded like everybody else, but they'll eventually help you. And the other alternative is go to an attorney who's a certified elder law attorney who actually deals with these topics. And not all certified elder law attorneys do. There are a small group of attorneys in the state who specialize in Medicaid. Idaho Legal Aid has senior services available for people over 60 at no charge. There's no criteria for income or assets, but they're a great resource. And if they can't help you, they'll certainly send you off in the right direction. The one other way, again, recognizing you have a 70% chance of needing care before you die, it's going to cost money. If you say, well, my daughter's going to do it, or my husband's going to do it, the caregiver spouse usually predeceases the one they're caring for, which is not any good. That means the whole house of cards falls down. If you ask your children to do that, you're really making a major shift in their lives. They don't earn as much money. They have their families that they're trying to help. They lose retirement benefits. They lose Social Security benefits. I mean, it's a really major sacrifice on their part to be a caregiver. And that may be what they want to do, but recognize that these are pretty significant responsibilities you're asking them to pick up. So the other way that I'm a huge fan of is long-term care insurance. I mean, our government you don't need to go, I mean, you're certainly welcome to read it. You can get it online, this New York Times article. But seniors are going bankrupt because they don't have significant enough resources to pay because they're living longer, their medical expenses, and then they decline as they age. And that's not the way to spend your last golden years. That's the rotten way to spend it. So planning ahead, you're talking to me, I'm a lawyer, I'm a planner. If you plan ahead, you can really protect your future. And that's why I like the long-term care insurance piece of this, so that you get to decide how the money is going to be spent, that you're going to be spending it in your own home. Medicaid right now, you're going to be in a shared room in a skilled nursing facility or an assisted living facility. There'll be a curtain between you and the next person. My Aunt Betty just moved in one in November of last year, and I'm heartbroken about it because she's on Medicaid. She's in a room, there's a curtain between her and the other person. The other person is nasty. And she has a wardrobe and a chest of drawers that's smaller than this podium, and that's it for her personal stuff. And I'm sending her cookies once a week just because I just have to do something to try to bring some joy into her life. But you don't want that. So I want Josh to come up here and talk to you about long-term care insurance just for a moment. This is Josh Hosington. He works with Idaho Trust Bank. He's an independent financial person there. And did you bring your picture?
I didn't.
Oh.
What I did bring, though, because I think we were on the same exact page, was more articles from the Wall Street Journal.
Microphone.
Oh, microphone.
Oh.
I'm sorry, I'm on TV. I think my mom always said that I have a face for radio, though. I think that's a
You
famous.
know what? Yeah, you can take it out of my pocket.
A famous quote of some sort. So thank you, Susan. I appreciate the opportunity. So I'm here to talk to you a little bit about insurance, what it is. mostly what I'm going to cover is what it was and what the environment looks like today. And it's definitely different. According to the federal government, so this is the Wall Street Journal again, the federal government projects about a quarter of Americans turning 65 between 2016 and 2019. 65% of them are going to need long-term care and coverage of some sort. Whether that is through insurance or whatnot, most of the time it's actually your family. That's the unsung heroes of the long-term care market, long-term care provider market. There's like $500 billion worth of services provided by spouses and loved ones. And that's, as Susan mentioned earlier, rapidly drying up. So one of the things that I talk to my clients about is the insurance. How can we outsource some of this risk to a carrier to help provide you income in the future? In the past, 1990s, insurance was geared to the middle class. You paid premiums. If you needed care, then you got care. You fought the insurance company for every nickel and dime that you got. That has rapidly dried up. There's very few carriers that provide that type of coverage anymore. Why is that? Insurance companies miscalculated the risk. In 1990s, they did not expect current coverage or care costs to be $4,500 per month. This is what it averages today. So what do I do and what do I recommend? I recommend hybrid type insurance policies. These are life insurance contracts that help pay a portion. They do a lot of what Susan's talking about, provide coverage for 5 years or a specific period in time so that you can do some of these wonderful planning techniques. They don't cover it all. They're not the silver bullet to kill the magical werewolf, but they are going to provide you with some flexibility. These costs are real. You are gonna, if you receive care, and there's a really good chance that you're gonna need care of some shape, form, or fashion. Hopefully family members can help out. $4,500 a month is what you're gonna pay. For long-term care coverage on a hybrid type policy for someone in their 60s, you're looking at $5,600 annually in terms of what your premiums are going to be. We're going to cap that. You're only going to have to pay it for a certain period of time, typically around 10 years. But the big benefit is this isn't a use it or lose it. That's why most folks don't look at insurance like, what happens if I die? What happens if a meteor comes down and strikes me dead today? You don't get that money. This will provide your spouse, this will provide your beneficiaries that money, maybe even some protection. So it's basically long-term care insurance without those handcuffs that we're so accustomed to listening to or hearing about when we Google long-term care insurance. So I'll be available afterwards to discuss that in more detail if you have any specific questions. A couple pointers that I would give to you is, go talk to whoever is doing your financial planning today. Ask them or her about this and see what and how they can help you with this. There's plenty of options out there. My only recommendation is make sure they're independent. They're not an agent specifically looking at one carrier. There's a plethora of insurance companies that can fit your needs. With that, I'll let Susan take back over the power of the microphone.
And the pocket. Thank you. One of the problems with in the insurance business, how do I figure this out? Okay. I'm a lawyer, so all this geometric, move it around. Cool, thank you. I'm getting old too. I forgot what I was saying. So we'll move on. But you do need the long-term care insurance, at least I think so, because you have the independence of where you want to go. And as Josh was saying, if you have it and you pay it over a finite time period, then you're not exposed to these increases of the premiums. Because one thing that happens to many of my clients as they get into their 80s, now, if you save $5,000 a year, that's a little more than 1 month in assisted living, definitely not the full amount of what it's in a nursing home. But when they get in their 80s and the premiums just keep going up because the insurance companies keep adjusting, oh, well, we didn't calculate right, they start to drop the insurance. That is not the time to drop your long-term care insurance. It's when you're 85. But again, they say I'm on a limited budget, and so I can't handle it. So it's really smart when you do buy it, to buy it over a certain time period, and then you're not. So 10 years you pay the premiums, and then you're done. You don't have to keep ratcheting them up as time goes by. Well, what we covered is the first two pillars. Assess your current situation, figure out where you want to go, and then come up with a plan to get you there. The last one is do it. Don't just talk about it. Actually sit down and figure out what the plan is and implement that plan. Sign the documents, coordinate your finances so that they're coordinated with your plan, so you don't have your life insurance policy still going to your first spouse that you've been divorced from for decades because you forgot to change the beneficiary on that. And then keep it up to date. The law changes, your health changes, your money changes, your relationship with people change. Something's bound to change as the years go by. So I recommend at least every 3 years that you review that to see that it's still current, and then make any changes that are necessary to keep it up to date. Of course, if something happens, change it at that time. If somebody predeceases you, or your relationship becomes impossible, or your finances change in a significant way. I had one client who talked to me, came to a program like this, talked to me after that program, said, yeah, I need to think about it, came back the following spring, came back the spring after that, never did decide to do anything. Until the summer of the third year, she called me up in July. She was over at St. Luke's getting some tests done. And she said, gee, I didn't think, now maybe I ought to write that will. Well, I said, okay. And I got the information on the phone. She was a widow, she had no children. She was in her 80s. I normally don't go to the hospital, but if that's necessary, I do that on occasion. And she called me on a Thursday, and she wanted me to come the next day to the hospital. Please don't expect that I can operate that fast. But at that time, I actually did that, and I said, okay, we'll have it ready for you, and I'll bring it over. What time do you want me to come on Friday? And she said, well, I'll call you and let you know when I'm done with the test. Well, the call I got, she died. So she had nothing in place. She had a cousin she wanted to give money to, a friend, and her church. And she had substantial assets. It ended up, we had to go to the Idaho Code to see where it is. It took me 3 years to find all these people. Her parents were dead. Her sisters had died without children. She was in her 80s. We had to go up to her grandparents and then out to everybody. I mean, these people did not know this woman. The one cousin did. We ended up with 30-some people. The law required me to spend 3 years looking for them. It was like that old millionaire program. I'd send letters out to people saying, oh, you're going to inherit something from this lady. As soon as I got those letters, and they started calling me saying, how much money am I going to get? Could I get it tomorrow? It wasn't at all what she wanted. The cousin got a pittance, the church didn't get anything, her friend didn't get anything. So that's why I say do it. I mean, you say, yeah, I have time, I'll do it next year, I'll do it in November, I'll do it next February. Just do it. And then even if it isn't perfect, it'll be better than having nothing in place. And again, you can always change this as time goes by. So that's the way that process works. Let me go through this quickly. Getting old. This is my magic wand. I mean, I can't stop that. I'm getting old. I mean, I look in the mirror and I say, my God, I'm not only looking like my mother, I'm now looking like my grandmother. And look in the mirror and I say, gee, I've got more gray hair than I did last time, as I recall. It's just the way it works. You don't have any choice. What happens when you die? You get to choose. And you get to eliminate the chaos in your family. And if anybody's mad, they're mad at you and you're dead and you don't care. They won't know about it until you're gone, but you've said how things are going to be. So if they're mad at somebody, they can grumble about you, but they can't really be mad at one another for what you came up with. Getting sick, it's getting old and getting sick. I mean, if I could pay somebody to do my exercises, I would pay them money. I hate to exercise. I just hate it. And I go to the YMCA and I'm watching the clock. Now everything else in my life just speeds by. But when I'm in that exercise class, it's like, oh gosh, only 5 minutes have gone by, But I do it just because I figure if I'm going to be in my 90s, I'd like to be able to get around, just like you've all addressed. I want to be mobile. I don't want to have to be in a wheelchair or have somebody there all the time to push me around. And so these are all these getting old and getting sick and senility. Those are just progressions, but we can slow them down by doing all the things they tell us to do that we hate to do. No long-term care insurance. Josh just mentioned, one possibility. I mean, he's got a basket full of different variations that you'd fuzz out if he talked about them, but when you're talking with him or whomever your financial person is on one-on-one, he can focus on what your needs are and come up with something that would hopefully fit. Who'll care for me? You get to choose. And if you don't have somebody to choose, there are truly people out there who will do this. We have professional guardians, people who will go to the hospital with you and go to the doctor meetings with you, so you'll have an advocate. And if you get sick, and they'll be there. They'll show up in the emergency room, so they'll be there and consistently cover your back for those kinds of health decisions if that's what you need. Same thing on the financial side. There are professionals. Josh works at a bank, Idaho Trust Bank. They have a trust department. There are some other banks in this town. Washington Trust has a trust department. U.S. Bank, Wells Fargo. There are a number of banks that have trust departments. Care in your later years. If you think you're going to, you'd like to be in your home, but it's just not realistic. There are too many stairs. It's too far away from the stores. For whatever reason, you really think you want to move, look seriously at that. And there are people, if you don't know where to look, if you're in this community and other communities as well, there are professionals who will help you, who know what the facilities are and what might fit for you or you and your family, whether it's an independent living place like Meadow Lake or the Valley View, I don't know what they call it now, the Garden Center or something like that, this place, Harris Ranch out here in East Boise, or an independent living or assisted living or whatever. There are professionals in the community who will sit down with you and your family and help figure out what is the best facility for you, for your budget, for your interests, and so forth. Running out of money, that's a big concern for a lot of people. But if you plan, if you sit down with a professional, with me or someone like me or someone like Josh, you can see what your future is and make that actually work. Which facility to go to? As I mentioned, there are people that handle these kinds of things. They're called care managers, and they know the community, and these facilities change all the time. So if you're looking at one, they'll help you figure out what's good for you or loved ones that you have. And maintaining your lifestyle. Again, that's just planning. I mean, if I go bong, I want to look like Marilyn Monroe. Have you seen a transformation? No. On my best day, I never looked like Marilyn Monroe, even though I had a wish or two about that. So when you're talking about maintaining a lifestyle, what is it that you want to do? And then actually take the steps to make that happen. And you can. And that's the fun part about this, because you're planning ahead of time. This is not a crisis. We can deal with a crisis and try to solve problems in a crisis, but we're much more limited in what we can do if there hasn't been an appropriate plan put in place. So let me wrap this up. If you want to, there's a green sheet that Terry gave you. Where did I got all these here. If you take that out, there are a couple of purposes for this. One is, I've learned that if you actually write down what it is you've learned here and what you think is an appropriate action step for you, you are much more likely to accomplish it rather than it just being in your head and you walk out the door. I mean, there are studies that show you're like 10 times more likely to actually move forward. So you might want to take a moment and write down, what have you learned, what lesson have you learned here that applies to you, and what would be an action step that you'd want to do about that. You may want to take the additional step and say, what do you think it's cost you in terms of time and money in the last 12 months for not having an estate planning or updating your estate plan? We have a lot of people that once they've created an estate plan and signed all the documents, they say to us, it just lifts this weight off of their shoulders. They just really just seem lighter and certainly more relieved about that. And then, of course, how much would you gain if you actually did something for your plan in the next few months? If you'd like to meet with me, there's no charge for that first meeting, and you can indicate that there. And what happens if you do elect to meet with me, Terry will call you or someone from my office will call you, and they'll ask you a few questions because we want to see if we're an appropriate fit for you. Sometimes people want us to accomplish something that's just not what we do, and we'll refer you to a more appropriate resource, another attorney who could better serve your needs, if that's so. Hopefully that won't happen, but anyway, we go through that process and then set up an appointment. That first meeting usually is about an hour. There's no charge for that meeting. And we actually go through this process. Where are you? What do you want to accomplish? And then show you some plans that help you accomplish that. We talk about a budget in terms of what it costs and how much time it takes. People ask me about my fees. I never know until we figure out what it is you want to accomplish. But I will tell you my fees generally range from a low of about $3,000 to a high of $12,000 to $15,000. If you're paying the higher fees, the only important reason you'd ever pay me money anyway is because I'm improving your life. I'm helping you accomplish what you want to accomplish. It's not common that we do the higher level, but I'm just letting you know that is a range. And then after you decide you want to go forward, I ask that you pay me whatever it is the fee is, and usually our turnaround time is about 2-3 weeks for you to come back and sign all the documents and do the additional steps to put your plan in place. If you want me to speak to a group, just indicate that. If you're not interested, that's fine. We are not going to call you, only if you say you want to hear from us. If you want to sign up for the newsletter I talked about and that video blog, just give us your email address and we'll put you on the list. One of the blogs came out just yesterday. And then if you would put down what I can do to improve, I'd greatly appreciate that. We have offered this webinar because we've had some people say, I can't come down, I can't take the time to come down to this facility, and I still like that information. So that is because of comments from people like you. We've continued to change and improve. And then anything else you want to write down, just do that. I'd appreciate it. When you turn that in, you will get $1 million. Now, you can keep it yourself, or you can give it to your grandkids, or you can drop it on the sidewalk and see who stops to pick it up. But they're just fun. So I want to thank you so much for coming this morning, and I appreciate your spending the time with me. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I do. I think I didn't list it in a concern. One of the main things that I want to know is if you have a will that is current and legal and blah, 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 is it really necessary to have a trust?
The question is, if you have a will that's current and says all the things you want to, is it necessary to have a trust? No, you don't have to have a trust. The will deals with death. So it says when you die, who's going to be in charge and who gets your stuff. And so when you die, the person who's your nominated personal representative will file that with the court and go through the probate process and deal with the expense and the time that takes. It will not address if you become incompetent. So, and a trust is not perfect for everybody, not by any stretch. So, if you have a trust that says when you die, who gets the stuff and who's in charge, it will also deal with when you become incompetent, who's going to handle things. And it stays private. So if you have a boring life like me, who cares? But I've had some clients who have really over-the-top interesting lives, and that stays private if it's in a trust. It's not private if it's in a will. And the will just doesn't cover incompetency. So it's just choices. It just depends on what you want to accomplish for yourself and your family. You, sir.
I have a trust, wife and I, say, and I die. She can sell the house without having to go through court, can't she?
Yeah, the question is if you have a joint trust with your spouse and the husband dies, can the wife sell the house? Sure, because a house would be, if you put the house in the trust, then it says that the owner is the trust. So what would happen for your wife to sell the house is she'd show a death certificate and she'd show certain portions of the trust and she'd sign her name, trustee of the trust, to get the money. They're going to write a check to her as trustee of the trust for $300,000, whatever the house is worth. And then she does whatever she wants with it. Yes.
Are all banks with trustee departments, fiduciaries?
Yes. But there are a limited number of banks. The credit unions don't do that. But yes, and what that means is they have to be a question of the banks that have trust departments, are they fiduciaries? A fiduciary is somebody who has the responsibility to handle the funds for someone else in an appropriate manner. And that's in a safe manner. They have to be conservative how they handle the money. They have to follow your wishes. They can't say, boy, that was a stupid idea that you came up with. We're going to do something totally different. And the banks haven't.
Say they're fiduciaries, or is it illegal?
The question, do they say they're fiduciaries? The law requires them to be a fiduciary. When you get hired and appointed to handle funds for somebody else, if somebody hires me to manage their affairs after they're gone, I have a legal responsibility to follow their instructions and to follow the law that requires all the different steps that I do.
My husband and I have no children, and he's an only child, 2 only children. And I have half brothers and sisters, so we would probably choose a personal representative. How much do they cost per year? Or how does that work?
The question is when, and let me shorten your question a little bit, but when you appoint someone to handle your affairs, a personal representative or a trustee, what do they charge? The legal system in Idaho says the fee has to be reasonable, but we don't have a fee schedule for that. The banks, and so it's on an hourly rate or a percentage rate. And the bank trust departments usually charge between 1% to 2% of the gross value of the estate for appropriating the estate or being the trustee or any professional that would be in that range. And it can be, on an hourly basis. An hourly basis that's appropriate. So if you have a CPA who you've nominated to be a personal representative, perhaps their hourly basis is $200 an hour. And they would not be able to charge $200 an hour to clean out your refrigerator. They would have to hire somebody else at a more appropriate rate for that kind of thing. So that's why the standard is reasonable. There is no set fee schedule. Are there any other questions? Okay. Well, then I'm still going to wind this up, although I appreciate your being here. If you would fill this out and give that to Terry, she'll give you your your $1 million. And those of you who are watching on your computer, there's an evaluation form like this for you as well to send in to us, and then we'll contact you. Thank you so much for spending your time with me this morning. I hope this has been a help to me, to you. It's been a pleasure for me. Thank you.